Hey everyone, welcome back to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. Today I start my review and summary of the Mary Trump book, Too Much and Never Enough. Now I want to first preface that there will be spoilers because the way I do reviews, I not only review it, I kind of give an overview. Now there is a lot of information in this book, a lot of information. So even though I'm giving you just some high points, there's still a lot more in there. So I highly recommend reading this book if you want to know all the stuff that's in there, but I'm going to give you some high points. As far as the book itself, it's available hardback and softback. It's approximately 240 pages, which was quite short for a book this size. I also read Omarosa's book and some of the other books about Trump, and they were much longer. So this one was on the shorter side, but still a great read. I listened to it on Audible, where it takes just a little over 7 hours to listen to it. It is read by the author herself, Mary Lea Trump, who is the daughter of Donald Trump's deceased older brother, Fred Trump Jr. And so we're going to get into all that. But first, I do have some housekeeping. And for those of you that want to skip this, I'll put a timestamp just below so that you don't have to listen to all that when the book review and summary actually begin. So first, I want to say a wonderful thank you to all my new subscribers, all the wonderful comments about the 𝗙𝗵𝗍𝗶 books, and those of you that have been watching my past videos. Want to say hello to all my wonderful patrons and channel members, and a big shout out to my wonderful patrons, Lori Holmes, Zachary Reese, Kimberly Jolly, Kate Whitlett, 𝗙𝗵𝗍𝗶 and her daughter Chloe, Lauren Kirk, Sarah Carney, Andrea Lee, Tabora Sumners Cooper, and Stephanie Mertz, and to my wonderful channel members, Kimmy Middleton, Joe Qatar, Katrina Middleton, Enigma X, Sherry Hendricks, Mary B. Sunshine, and Stephanie Mertz, who is both patron and channel member. Thank you. And a big shout out to those guys, because I know I say that a lot, but it's just because they really do help me, as all of you do, because I do get ad revenue as well. Anytime you interact with my channel, whether it's through becoming a channel member, which you can do just below, Patreon is also just below, or subscribing, which is the most important thing you can do, giving a like, giving a comment, get me into that YouTube algorithm so that more people see me, I get more views, and all of that just helps me buy the supplies I need to do this. All the books you guys want reviewed, I am going to review the other 𝗙𝗵𝗍𝗶 book series because there was a lot of requests for it. I will put it into the rotation. I do have other cases I want to cover, so I am going to put that into the rotation, as well as reading Melanie Gibbs' book and so many other things. I'm also looking at the 𝗂𝗂𝗫𝗀 sex abuse case, which I'm having to review that. I know I'd said it was going to come out this weekend. It's going to probably be next weekend because it's a lot more information there than I thought, and I want to make sure I do a good job on it. I know a subscriber requested that. It's coming. Don't worry. So all of that, the money that I get from ad revenue and from my wonderful patrons and channel members just helps me be able to research that, buy memberships to new sites and buy the books and buy new software to make the videos better. So without you guys, I couldn't continue to do this as often as I do it. I would probably have to cut back a little bit because I do have a day job, but I will always be here doing this for you as long as I can. So anyway, I love doing it. I love sharing these stories with you. I'm glad that I can just geek out with you guys. So enough of housekeeping. Let's get into the book. As I said before, Mary Lea Trump, niece of Donald Trump, daughter of his oldest deceased brother, Fred Trump Jr. She is a licensed psychotherapist and psychologist with a PhD. She had some strife with the family. That does come out in the book. I also watched a couple of interviews with her where she talked about her reasoning for this book. A lot of the stuff that we're going to discuss happened years ago. We're talking the 80s and the 90s. So why didn't she write the book then? That's been the major question, posed to her in interviews. I'll drop a clip here of an interview of her answering that question.
With the money issues harder because...
But it was all about the money, wasn't it?
I'm a Trump. You know, I everything's about money in this family. But, you know, I didn't write it as a form of therapy or anything like that. In fact, I would have preferred not to write it. It was quite difficult. And I sometimes feel I would have been better off not knowing some of the things I now know.
She packed a lot into.
But as you can see, mainly it's because she felt that the best way to bring attention to what she considers a calamity and an evil person is to do it right before his re-election attempt. I have some beef with that. I also have some beef with a lot of stuff in this book, but I want to be as fair and as objective as possible. I tried to go into this with a fair mind. And if the subject or the intent of this novel or this book was to make you hate Donald Trump, if you go into this as a totally neutral person, somebody that has no opinion of Donald Trump whatsoever, and I know that's hard to do because people all over the world have opinions of Donald Trump, but if you actually go into this as a neutral, objective person, you're going to most likely come out feeling sorry for President Trump because their father was an ass. That's the only way to put it out there. You will probably come out feeling more sorry for the president than anything. Now, if you already hate Donald Trump, this is going to give you more ammo to hate him even more. If you like Donald Trump, you're again going to like him even more, and you're probably going to have a reason to dislike other members of his family, especially the author. So I did try to go into this with as neutral a mindset as possible. I will try to keep it apolitical, even though it's kind of hard when you're talking about the President of the United States to keep it apolitical. But I will absolutely try to do that. Now, as to the book itself, as I said, available softcover, hardcover, about 240 pages, and is read by the author on Audible. It's about a 7-hour listen. I listened to it over about 3 days. I took a lot of notes. But before I actually jump into the book, let's go over the family members that you will encounter in the book so that you have a good understanding, because she launches into the book with you knowing who the Trump family members are, and not everyone does. So I'm going to do some brief background right now on the Trump family. Start with the patriarch of the family, Fred Trump Sr. Frederick Christ Trump, essentially the second, because he was named after his father, Friedrich, who immigrated with his wife from Germany. There's an interesting story there that will be told as part of the book, but basically he came over in the early 1900s to avoid military service in World War I, which he disagreed with. He came here, started a family, and then realized he wanted to go back to Germany, but couldn't because he had fled military service. So he came back to the United States and died shortly after of the Spanish flu. And his young 12-year-old son, Fred Trump Jr., basically wasn't much for school. He thought there were better things to do. So he basically, after they settled in Queens, he basically teamed up with his mother, Elizabeth Christ Trump, who helped him start a construction company. At first, they did home renovations, they did basic construction jobs, and them together grew Trump Construction, or Trump Management, into a powerhouse of construction and of housing development and rental properties. So that's where their money was made, is in construction, building houses for other people, building houses and apartment buildings for themselves, and then renting them out to others. And Fred Trump Sr. was the founder, along with his mother, of all of that. His wife was Mary Trump, born in 1912 to a Scottish family in Scotland, also a family of immigrants who came here. When they married, she basically settled into the mode of homemaker and housewife. She was never super well. She had issues with childbirth, and after giving birth to 5 children, she had to have an emergency hysterectomy and ended up developing severe osteoporosis, as well as some other medical conditions that kind of limited her interactions for a number of years, and even limited the care she could give her actual children. And a lot of that's brought out in the book, which we will talk about. So just think of it as Trump Sr. in charge, and then Mary. Now let's get into the 5 Trump children. The oldest is Mary Ann Trump Barry, who was born in 1937. She's the eldest of the Trump children. She was kind of a mother to the children, since her mother, Mary, couldn't really do that, or didn't want to do that. Like I said, like it's covered in the book. And she has a son named David, and there was a famous story that as a grown man, Donald was playing ball with David and wanted to beat him so bad that he ended up throwing the ball so hard he cracked the boy's head really hard. Now, as I said, whether or not that's true, we don't know. But what you need to know about Mary is that she is the oldest of the children, and she was an assistant district attorney for the state of New York for many, many years, and eventually, thanks to both her father and Donald's influence, became a senior federal judge in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals under George Bush. So that's Mary Ann Trump. Then you have Fred Trump Jr., who will be called out in this book as Freddie. He was the oldest son. He was born in 1938. He never wanted to go into the family business. The girls really weren't allowed to go into the family business. They were very much a family of strong gender roles, and I'm sure that has something to do with their parents being part of what is known as the silent generation. My parents were silent generations. My grandparents were the generation before the silent generation. So I am well versed in understanding the mentality of that generation. So the very strong gender roles there. And so as a result, he wanted his 3 sons, to follow in his footsteps. Well, Freddie was kind of the black sheep of the family. He went to college. He joined a fraternity. He was studying business as his father wanted, and then decided to learn how to fly planes. So he took classes. He got his commercial pilot's license. It would eventually leave the family business to become a commercial pilot for TWA Airlines, working as an airline pilot for about a year altogether, and then going back into the family business where he would not thrive so well. And we will again get into that into the book. He died at the age of 43 of a heart ailment, and we will talk about that as well. And this is, of course, the author's father. Elizabeth Trump Grau was the next born in the family. She was born in 1942. She is a little bit older than Donald Trump. She is an executive with Chase Manhattan Bank and married to famous film producer James Grow. According to information which we'll talk about, it was Fred Trump that helped secure her first job with Chase Manhattan, and she remained there until and rising to the executive level ranks, and then retiring with her husband to Florida in the 2000s. Then you finally have Donald Trump, who I think we all know is now 45th president of the United States, running for re-election. He kind of took over his father's construction business as his father's right-hand man. He grew Trump, let's admit it, he grew Trump into the brand we know it as. Without Donald, there would have most likely not been a Trump brand. There would have been a very successful real estate development company called Trump Construction, but there would never have been a Trump organization. He grew it into what it is today, even though with all the bankruptcies and everything else, you still know what Trump is because of Donald Trump. Also a reality show star with The Apprentice, and now 45th president of the United States. Whatever your feeling is on the man, whether or not he is just, whether or not you think he's dumb, but I think the guy's savvy. I mean, look what all he's accomplished. You can't, not all of that's dumb luck. You have to admit he's got some savvy to him. And then after that, you have Robert Trump, who recently passed away. but he was born in 1948. He was basically the CEO of Trump Construction, has worked in the Trump organization his entire life, and recently died of a brain aneurysm. So rest in peace, Robert Trump. And he is the youngest of the Trump children. And now, let's dive into the book, shall we? The book is broken into essentially 4 main parts, plus a prologue and an epilogue. So once you open the book, you immediately open to the epilogue, where you have Mary L. Trump, the author, introducing herself. She also opens with telling about the initial meeting of the family at the White House right after Donald Trump's election in 2016, where she describes having had a long rift with the family, but was still invited, so she was surprised. Both her and her brother Fritz were both invited. And how when she entered the Oval Office, she saw a picture of Fred Trump Sr. prominently displayed, where Donald Trump can always see it from his desk. And at that time, there was no picture of their mother, Mary Trump. Well, Mary Ann, Sister Mary Ann, asked that a picture of their mother be brought. And it was. Trump agreed. Should have had her here all along. And so they dropped it there. And then she kind of engages in a conversation with Eric Trump, Donald Trump's second son, and says, hey, it's me, your cousin Mary. I haven't seen you since high school. And she said Eric was there with his girlfriend, who said, yeah, I know who you are. Yeah, glad you could come. And then it was just kind of short and sweet. Kind of short and sweet with Donald Trump Jr., even Barron. It was kind of a short, sweet thing. And then didn't really mention Tiffany. Tiffany, I believe, is Donald's daughter with Marla Maples. So Tiffany strikes me as the most approachable of the Trump children, that she's kind of laid back, even though they did trot her out to the RNC. She's very eloquent. I think she just wants to pretty much live her life as far out of the mainstream as she can, though she will help out her family when needed. I think she's the most down-to-earth and approachable of the Trump children. Now, whether or not she wasn't there that day, or the author, because the author liked her mother so much, and we'll talk about that, maybe she also likes Tiffany and didn't want to bring her into this. So Tiffany is not mentioned a whole lot in this book. I'll just bring that out, where Donnie Jr. and Eric and Ivanka are. But she doesn't mention Tiffany, and she doesn't mention Barron, I'm sure because of his age. So that's good. That's ethical. I like that. So she speaks to all her cousins, and then they go and tour the White House. They look at the Lincoln bedroom. She says that Trump said something like, it hasn't changed since George Washington slept here, even though George Washington never slept in the Oval Office. I mean, not in the Lincoln bedroom, excuse me. He may have, no, he didn't. George Washington never occupied the White House. When he was president, the capital was New York City. So just putting that out there. And so she describes a dinner that they all attended that evening, and then how Donald specifically hugged her and said that he wanted her here because he wanted to bury the hatchet. So just seemed to be very, very strained. Then she has a flashback to a dinner she had with her Aunt Mary Ann, in which Mary Ann said that it should be Freddie, the author's father, being president, who was really the heir apparent and the greatest Trump brother ever. She said, her sister said that. I mean, her aunt said that. We do know that a lot of the members of the Trump family, including Mary Ann, have said that this book is full of falsehoods. So according to the author, her major sources were her memories and actual legal documents that anybody can get access to. So I'm going to try to take her at her word, but that seems fishy to me, because Freddie had a lot of issues, which we'll get into. But anyway, she said that's what she said. She also mentioned that Aunt Mary Ann had a lot of skeletons in her closet. Okay, we knew that. And then the author kind of comes back and mentions that she was surprised she was even invited, because she was a huge supporter of Hillary Clinton. She's an ardent democratic socialist, and that she feels that it's her duty to protect the United States from the tyranny or the evil that is her Uncle Donald. And then the epilogue or the prologue kind of fades away, and then we get to part one. Part one consists of about 3 chapters, and each of the 4 parts of this book has a specific thesis that anyone that's reviewed this book can easily pull out. In part one, the subtitle is "Cruelty is the Point," and this is basically the history of the Trump family, Fred Trump Sr., with a special emphasis on the way that Fred Trump Sr. treated his children, which is strong gender roles, girls over here, boys over here, and how he functioned. Because she is a trained psychologist, she did diagnose him as being a functioning sociopath. Now, you can take that for what you will. I mean, she is a licensed psychologist, so I'm inclined to believe that she can recognize a sociopath when she sees it. But then again, she also never did therapy for her grandfather, so take that as you will. I'm trying to be as neutral here as I can. I really am. And so she kind of goes on to describe how he used very cruel tactics to rein in, especially his sons. They were not allowed to show emotion, or only show specific types of emotion, and they were punished if they showed emotions other than those that were allowed. Specifically, he wanted no weakness. He would not allow weakness. He would not allow sadness. He did allow anger and occasionally happiness, but anything else was kind of suppressed. And how, in her opinion, he zoned in on her father, Freddie, and Donald, and how they got the worst of it. The difference was that Freddie, according to her, let it destroy him, where Donald absorbed it and learned to adapt. And then in turn, he kind of became a secondary Fred by keeping Robert in line. And this all comes out, but this part kind of describes how Fred Sr. ruled his family, as well as the history of the Trump family. So let's get now into chapter 1. Chapter 1 opens with a description of young Mary Ann Trump, only about 12, finding her mother, Mary, collapsed on her bathroom floor unconscious. She immediately goes and tells her father, Fred Trump Sr., who then goes, checks on his wife, tells her to go to bed, and then to get up, make sure she gets up and goes to school the next day. Nothing's wrong, that mom will be fine. And then he goes and calls Jamaica Queens Hospital, where he had a whole lot of pull, and they transport Mary there. So the next morning, when young Mary Ann gets up, her father is there, and he has another conversation saying he wants her to go to school today. He will call her if anything happens, but the doctors are now saying that her mom may not make it. Just very point blank telling this kid her mother is most likely going to die, but to go to school and to do her normal day, and if anything happens, i.e. if your mother dies, I will call you. So, yeah, let that sink in for a minute. Wow. Now, at this time, Robert was still an infant. It was probably his birth that caused the severe abdominal bleeding and uterine bleeding that Mary Trump was suffering at this time, which caused her to have an emergency hysterectomy. Donald was only about 18 months to 2 years old, and then the children were young. So Mary was the oldest at 12. So you can imagine all the children were infant to, elementary school age. Later that day, around lunchtime, Mary Ann did receive a call at school, and she immediately thought she was about to be told her mother was dead. Instead, it was her father saying that her mother was going to make it, but she was going to have some surgeries. And so she had an emergency hysterectomy and then 2 subsequent surgeries to repair other damage. And from that point on, the author kind of goes into a description of Mary, that Mary was never the most nurturing mom to begin with. She kind of used her children to comfort herself rather than comforting her children. So she wasn't the best of moms to begin with, according to the author, who is actually named after her. So, but after this incident, this surgery, Mary became even more withdrawn. She was never well. She was always sickly after this. The surgeries caused severe mineral depletion, according to the author, that led her to developing things like arthritis and osteoporosis that made her very frail, especially in her elder years. So at this point, Mary Ann, the oldest daughter, again, federal judge now, became the mother of the Trump children. Fred Sr. went on with his life. He went on with building his construction company, with closing deals, with trying to nurture his boys to take his place once they got older, and kind of depended on Mary Ann to do everything with the help of some housekeepers that were truly busy with just the cooking and the cleaning of the house, whereas Mary Ann provided all of the emotional support and emotional caregiving to her younger siblings. She talked about how Donald, who was around 2 years old, really needed his mom and would whine, and Fred Trump Sr. would punish him. And he learned to turn to Mary Ann. She did the best that she could, but again, if he got too whiny or too needy, Fred Trump would punish him. He also was very emotionally aloof with baby Robert, and as a result, all of the children, from Mary Ann to Fred Jr. to Elizabeth to Donald to Robert, all learned not to need anything but basic care. Food, shelter, clothing, maybe an occasional hug if they get hurt, but not too much. So all of them kind of learned to fend for themselves and not need anything but basic care. And Fred seemed to care very little about the condition of his wife as her health started to deteriorate. And then from here, the author delves into the history of the Trump family. So we open with Friedrich Trump in Germany in the 1800s. He escaped German army. He married another woman by the name of Elizabeth Christ. And in America, he fled Germany to America in the 1800s, the late 1800s, and then he tried to take he and his wife back to Germany, but he couldn't stay because he had fled the German army and the Weimar Republic, which was in charge of Germany upon his return. Or actually, the Kaiser had just fallen because of the end of World War I, and so the Weimar Republic was in its infancy, but it was the one in control, and they weren't too happy that Friedrich had fled military service, so he wasn't allowed to stay in Germany. So he had to take his wife right back to the United States, which he did. He worked a series of jobs, but died during the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. Fred Sr., who was 12 at the time of his father's death, with the help of his mom, Elizabeth, started a small construction company known as Trump, Elizabeth Trump and Sons, and it had risen to pretty good prominence in the borough of Queens by the time Fred was 18. They were quite the thing in Queens. It was about this time that Fred Sr., that would be Fred Sr., would meet Mary Ann McLeod, who was a recent immigrant from Scotland, started dating, and they married shortly thereafter. He moved his new wife into their house with his mom, Elizabeth. And even after they moved into their own house, Elizabeth came with them, and she ruled over Mary like Queen Victoria, Iron Woman, Margaret Thatcher, just right over Mary Ann. Fred was kind of, aloof to it because by now he had moved the headquarters of his company to Brooklyn, where it would remain until his death. And he worked 12, 14 hours a day, so he really wasn't seeing what was going on at his house to see what his wife was going through at the hands of her mother-in-law, his mother. So Mary's initial marriage with Fred Sr. was not always pleasant. Even when Elizabeth finally moved out and moved back into her own place, she would become a fixture around the Trump house, joining them for dinners, cooking when Elizabeth was sick, but was not what you would call a very loving grandmother. She was kind of aloof with the children, so it seems that Fred Sr. was behaving the way his mother had raised him. According to the author, Fred developed most of his buildings because this was the very beginning of the baby boomer generation. You had soldiers coming back from war, women stepping out of the workplace where they had been in droves since the war started, and you had a lot of need for housing because of the growing suburbs, the growing migration into cities for jobs, the growing industrial age that was really popping out since the end of World War II. The United States had positioned itself as a superpower, and so they were starting to see the prosperity that comes with that, and the baby boomer generation was starting to be born. So as a result, the Federal Housing Authority developed all kinds of great incentives for builders to build new homes, both in cities and in suburbs, and Fred Trump took a lot of these FHA loans to build these houses. He built thousands of homes during this period of American expansion. I would say 1946 to about 1950. He built a lot of homes in both New York and Virginia Beach, Virginia, with proceeds from this program, as did a lot of home builders. And she went on to point out that his entire company was built off the backs of the American taxpayer. I have beef with that because the government was giving these grants and loans for homes to be built. So he wasn't just taking this money and doing nothing with it. He was providing homes for the people that were paying the taxes that he got. Okay. True confession, I am an ardent capitalist. I believe in the free market. I am very much a moderate when it comes to politics. I lean very right on some things. I lean very left on other things. That's why I'm a libertarian. I'm very much, when it comes to social, I'm very liberal. Do whatever you want to do. Just don't hurt anyone else. When it comes to money, I'm more conservative. And if the government is offering grants and loans to businesses that not only provide jobs and build houses for people, do it. That's what they're there for. So evidently he paid these loans back because his company wasn't seized by the government. So as I said, you have to understand she is a socialist Democrat. So there's that socialist word. So she probably believes this is wrong. However, it's kind of a contradiction because socialists, pure socialism, wants the government to control all aspects of production. So what's the difference between a private company taking money from the government or the government controlling it? Anyway, off my political soapbox. Hope I don't lose any subscribers for that, just being honest. Anyway, let's get back into it. They would spend the majority of their years in New York with some brief jaunts to Virginia Beach, one during this time for him to build houses, and then returning to New York when the FHA program ended. And then you had a later on jaunt to Florida to begin some housing expansion down there after all the children were grown. But during this time, Mary became pregnant several times, which led to several miscarriages. And as a result, most of the Trump children were born quite a few years apart. There was almost a half generation between the oldest and the youngest. So there was a whole lot of years between them, which almost led to as if there were two separate families. So Donald was born around the time that the Trumps built their 23-room Trump manor in Queens. Then she was careful to mention that the Trump, Trump and Sons construction was ran with absolutely no debt, which is a great thing. I'm a Dave Ramsey believer. Cash is king, no debt. And smoothed with Democratic politicians and the mob to get government funding and other sources of funding. The mob, yeah, that's shady, but it's also New York. And so you can either smooth with the mob and do business with them, legitimate business with them, or you can pay them protection money. I would much rather do the legitimate business. Politicians, this is a thing since the dawn of time, and, you know, this was an early form of lobbying. So That's really nothing unusual. If she thought this was going to turn the average American who is used to the capitalist system against it, she was very wrong. So I don't see anything unusual there. There's always deals being made in back rooms. It's business. You can go into business too. That's what the wonderful thing about the free market. She did mention that Fred got up with Norman Vincent Peale. If you Google him, you're going to see he was an early minister, very conservative. He was one of the leaders of post-World War II conservative thought in America. And he had an early form of what is known as the prosperity gospel. I know you know what the prosperity gospel is. It is literally what Joyce Meyer, Benny Hinn, T.D. Jakes, all these televangelists that are dripping with diamonds and wealth, that's what they preach, that God will give you wealth if you just ask for it. And yeah. So he got in with an early form of the prosperity gospel. And part of this prosperity gospel was the power of positive thinking. Don't you ever think bad about yourself. In Norman Vincent Peale's eyes, and subsequently in Fred Trump Sr.'s eyes, an inferiority complex was the source of all evil. And the author speculates, and I agree with her, that having somebody that had inferior thoughts about themselves was the devil's workshop, and that is where his modus operandi for dealing with his children came in. He was heavily influenced by Norman Vincent Peale. And as a result, like a lot of purveyors of this prosperity gospel, even today, if you go listen to some of their sermons, you are rich because you dreamed it and saw it and God gave it to you. And that's exactly how Fred Trump Sr. saw himself. He was worthy of being rich because God gave it to him. Now, as an atheist, the God part, okay, you know how I feel about that. But as of, you dreamed it, you didn't just dream it, you went out and earned it. So if you do those things, yeah, you deserve to get rich. But I think I can see the writing on the wall here. I can see that, and this is not just source of the author and other sources too. Fred Trump Sr. is seen to be kind of full of himself, and I can understand that. So, yeah, I think he got full of himself, and I think he was an arse. I'm going to say that. And the way he treated his children was awful and detrimental, and I'm sure it did create a whole lot of mental anguish for the kids. But anyway, so we're talking about her father, Fred Jr., or Freddie, as he will be known. He was militantly loyal to his father. He was the oldest son, second oldest child. And he suffered the most, next to Donald, underneath his father, because Fred did have an inferiority complex, unlike Donald, who, if he had it, he hid it. So, she comments on how Donald watched his older brother suffer so much under his father's rule and kind of vowed not to do that, not to be like Freddie. He wanted to make his father proud, so Donald kind of internalized, if any feelings of inferiority he had, he internalized them and did away with them, because I think you can tell from hearing him speak, he doesn't have an thinking of himself as less than perfect is not something that Donald J. Trump does on a regular basis. So I think this is because of his father's influence and what he saw happen to his older brother. He did away with all of that. But unfortunately, Freddie didn't. And according to the author, Freddie started to slowly decay inside because of what his father was doing to him. Now, she also commented that because Robert was younger than Donald, Donald started treating Robert the same way that his father was treating Freddie and him, not allowing Robert to show any signs of being weak. He would control Robert by stealing his favorite toys and threatening to break them if Robert didn't do exactly what he said. Robert went to Mary asking for help. Mary simply took the toys and put them in the attic, therefore punishing Robert, who did nothing wrong. And Donald felt he had won because his brother no longer had the toys. So I think you can see how all of this kind of manifested into the narcissistic attitude that Trump appears to have. So I think she's on to something here. I think her analysis of behavior based on how Fred Trump Sr. treated his children is spot on. Spot on. Now, what about the girls, Mary Ann and Elizabeth? They were largely ignored by their father. They were girls to marry off one day, according to Mary about her grandfather. And so he ignored them. And they couldn't really turn to their mother, who was consumed with her own health and mental state. So the girls were kind of left on their own, and he very much kept the boys and girls separate. He didn't really do anything with the girls. He didn't nurture them at all. He didn't teach them, so they taught themselves. And then that's I think a testimony to their resilience. But he did come down hard on the boys. Now, Fred Jr. wanted to please his dad more than anything, so he did consent to go to college and study business so that he could come back and take a management position with a construction company. But while there, as an elective, he took some aeronautics classes and he fell in love with commercial flying and really wanted to pursue it. He wanted to be a pilot. But because of his father, he stayed with the business degree, but also pursued aeronautics as a minor and ended up graduating with not only his business degree, but a commercial pilot's license. So he also had joined a fraternity, a Jewish fraternity, and was very popular, had a lot of friends, started to try to work on his inferiority complex. He joined ROTC. He did graduate with a commission in the Air National Guard. And so the discipline did him really good. He was doing everything he could to do what Donald had already done and bury that inferiority complex deep down. So he was trying to do it in other ways, and I admire him for that. He went on a Bahamas vacation while he was there. While he was there, he met a young lady by the name of Linda Clapp, who would later become his wife and the mother of the author. But it was about the time that Fred was thriving at college that Donald started to become a terror at home. He wouldn't listen. He wouldn't listen to Fred Sr. He wouldn't listen to Mary. I think he had had enough, and he just broke, and he wanted it his way. And so as a result, they sent him to New York Military Academy. Now, New York Military Academy, though it sounds prestigious, it was one of several military academies in the state of New York. It was not the one that was there for prestigious education, as Fred Jr. had been sent to one that was more prestigious for academics because Fred was easy to control. But Donald was sent there for discipline and for punishment. And according to the author, Grandmother Mary was glad to get rid of Donald because he was hard to control. So even while he was at New York Military Academy, starting in the 8th grade through graduation, Fred would go to visit him every week. Mary wouldn't, but he would go to visit him every week. Don was thriving. He was rising through the ranks. The military discipline did him very, very good. And so 2 years after Donald had been at New York Military Academy, we fast forward to Fred's graduation from college, Freddie's graduation from college, where he, as I said, graduated with a business degree, a BA in business, as a second lieutenant in the Air National Guard by virtue of his ROTC training and a commercial flight license. But instead of pursuing his military or even going to be a pilot, which is what he really wanted to do, he did go to work with Fred Sr. in Brooklyn. And there he was trotted out to political meetings where he learned to smooth with the Democratic politicians that control New York. He learned how to cut costs. I mean, there's even stories of Freddie and Fred Sr. walking construction sites and picking up unused nails and then returning them to the foreman the next day to be used. I mean, they did everything they could to cut costs. If something looked raggedy, you paint it, you don't fix it. Now, if as a renter, as somebody who rents, I can understand how that's wrong, how I don't want a faulty window that's just been painted to look good. You need to be ethical when you do things, but cost cutting was the primary function of the Trump mindset. Freddie wasn't so much in that mindset. He wanted to do things correctly. There was a huge blow up where in an apartment building that needed windows, Freddie just ordered windows to be put in. And when Fred Sr. found out, he berated his son, saying, "Why didn't you just paint the old ones instead of wasting my money?" So it was things like that. And Fred Sr. never let Fred live down any perceived mistakes that he had made. He made his son life hell at the office. So it was he'd been working for his father about a year when he got a call from Linda. Remember Linda that he met in the Bahamas, who said that she was now a flight attendant or stewardess at that time for National Airlines and was looking for an apartment since she was based out of what would become JFK Airport. And Freddie got her an apartment in one of the Trump buildings, and they started dating and they got engaged. According to the author, Fred Sr. and Mary never liked her mother, Linda. They thought she was a gold digger. She was too plain. She wasn't good enough for their son. And so they didn't offer to help with the wedding or anything. But Linda's parents and Freddie took care of it. They were married in Fort Lauderdale, and she became a stay-at-home mom for two reasons. One, flight attendants for National Airline could not be married. That's, to me, very outdated and sexist, but okay, it was, it was the 50s and 60s. So, and that it was just what the Trump family expected. So she became a stay-at-home mom. Just after they returned from their honeymoon, they moved in. They were supposed to move into a Trump apartment, but they got their own in a non-Trump building. They got a poodle. They got pregnant immediately with Fritz, who is actually Frederick Creased Trump III. And Freddie took over a housing development project called Trump Village in Coney Island for his father, managing that, and spent some of his money, indulged his passion for flying, and bought a small Cessna airplane, though never telling Fred Sr. that he had done that. After a lot of push from Mary and Fred Sr., they finally moved their whole family to a Trump property known as the Highlander. And according to the author, it was typical of Fred Trump properties. It had a grand exterior, a grand lobby, looked wonderful, but the apartments were subpar. I don't know. I've never been in a Trump property, but that's what she said. Freddie still wanted to be a commercial pilot. In fact, he wanted to fill out an application with Trans World Airlines, Howard Hughes' Trans World Airlines, TWA, which was by far the most popular and cosmopolitan airline at that time. I mean, this is who the Hollywood elite used. It's who all the politicians used. I mean, it had surpassed even Pan Am, because Pan Am had a problem with hijackings and crashes. If you want to see my video on the deadliest airline disaster ever, I'll pop it up here. It was a Pan Am flight. And there was a whole lot of strife between Freddie and Fred over the Trump Village because, again, Freddie was doing things that Fred Sr. didn't want him to do, such as ordering new things instead of just painting over, bad things. He was trying to use quality materials, I suppose. And so Fred never let him forget about it. He told him that Donald was so much better than him, and Donald would rise above him once Donald got to the business, even though Donald was still in high school. So, as a result, Freddie finally had enough. He applied for a TWA pilot's job and received a job offer, and he took it. Trump Sr. was livid and considered it an ultimate act of betrayal. And guys, I didn't realize how long this was going to go, so I apologize. I'm going to end it here, part 1. I'll be back tomorrow with part 2, and we will finish the rest of the book. I hope you're enjoying it. This was a great read. I really did enjoy it. I highly recommend it. So with that, I'll be back very soon with the second part of the Mary Trump book review summary. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you're enjoying it. Have a great day. Until next time, Keto Comic. Hey,